To tube or not to tube? It's a very compelling question that we have as cyclists, as home mechanics, and as consumers today. It ranks right up there with disc brakes versus rim brakes and wax versus oil for lubricant. Today we're going to take a look at these two mechanisms for holding air in our tires and see which one is right for us. Now, this is a very discipline-dependent question. If you're a mountain biker or a gravel rider, naturally tubeless is the obvious choice. And if you run a more classically styled road bike with higher pressures and narrow tires, then tubes are the obvious choice. But for us endurance cyclists, it's a little bit more nuanced. So today, we'll look at the pros and cons of each system and see which one actually works out well for us. And there's one factor that I think has not been talked about enough that directly impacts the endurance cyclist in a way that the road racer and the gravel cyclist don't really need to contend with. So stay tuned for that and let's dive in to see if tubeless or tubes are right for you. Since this channel is overbiked or engineering, of course first we'll look at speed and efficiency. We really need our system as endurance cyclists to be as efficient as possible because we don't have that much power to put out hour after hour. Unfortunately, none of these systems really rise to the top. Tubeless systems and either TPU tubes, latex tubes, or even the faster versions of butyl tubes all fall really close to each other with speed and efficiency. Even the weight difference between them is not that much, so it's kind of a wash. Next, we can look at compatibility and limitations of each system. Now, technically, you can run tubes in pretty much any tire and on any wheel and any size tire, and at pretty much any pressure. Tubeless is a little bit different, though. It has some more restrictions. For a tubeless tire, you need a tubeless compatible wheel and a tubeless compatible tire that's not going to just weep sealant everywhere. On top of that, the tire size is also important. Those gravel cyclists and mountain bikers, they have plenty of width in their tires and their pressures are low enough that they have no issues running tubeless. But for many road cyclists, our tires are still a bit too narrow and require a bit higher pressure than works well with most sealants. I found anything above about 65 psi, and most of the mainstream sealants that I've tried just don't work very well. So with that in mind, if you want to run tubeless, expect to have at least a 30 millimeter wide tire as measured on the rim. This allows low enough pressures to keep them below 65 psi and still be efficient to use on the road. Anything more narrow than that, and you need higher pressures to prevent rim damage, which doesn't work well with most sealants. So you really want a modern wide rim and a modern wide tire if you want to use tubeless. So I guess that's a point for tubes. Next, let's consider FAF and how much effort is needed for general maintenance. This is all you need to run a tube system. A couple of spare tubes, maybe some clear quick patches, a few tire levers, and a pump. Here I've got some metal valves on TPU tubes so that they play well with my cyclists air pump that gets a little bit hot. There's a link in the description below for these specific tubes and for the cyclists pump. To run a tubeless system, you still need the same things that you do when you have a tube system. You need a couple of spare tubes and some quick patches and tire levers and a pump because you never know when your tires might get some severe damage and you might need to put in a tire boot and install some tubes. On top of that, there's plenty of other accessories that we need to shop for. That includes things like some tire worms, and we want to be able to install those on the road. So either a specific tool or a multi-tool that has a worm holder and an installation bit is pretty much a requirement. On top of that, the valve cores in the valves get clogged pretty regularly, and these are the 2 valve cores I have left from a 10-pack that I bought about a year ago. On top of that, you want to have a couple of spare valves laying around in case anything happens with those. And of course, a valve core removal tool to help make that whole process easier. One of the most important reasons to get one of these is so that you can install some sealant through the valve itself using a little funnel like this, or some people prefer like a plunger. It's good to measure exactly how much sealant you have, so a scale is important. And since you need to change the sealant every 3 to 4 months, getting a big liter-sized bottle will keep you going for about a year or so. On top of that, mounting the tubeless tires is pretty problematic, even with a high-quality hand pump. So one of these booster bottles, like this one from AliExpress, are almost a requirement. Altogether, this is a little, about $100 or so of extra stuff that you need above a tubed setup. If your rims don't have a solid rim bed like mine, you're also going to want to budget for some tubeless tape, and also that it's quite likely that installation can get messed up, or installing the tire will peel it back and it will need to be reinstalled. So yeah, definitely extra faff, definitely extra expense, so I guess that's another point for a tubed setup. So far, tubeless systems are about the same speed. They're much more expensive for initial purchase and for maintenance. They limit our tire choices. They're a lot of faff to set up and to maintain. And if something does happen on the road where we need to swap in a tube, we have to fully remove the valve from the rim, and that becomes a big mess before we can even put in the tube. And that tube also becomes a big mess after we use it. With all of that, why would we even consider a tubeless system? And I think the first benefit is what it says on the can, what it says on the tin. It stops punctures from happening. As a heavier rider on often rough roads, I experienced a lot of small punctures from things like small pieces of glass digging through the tire, or like a small wire puncturing the tube. And those types of punctures just automatically get sealed up. It takes a lot of stress and inconvenience out of the ride when you're just not having those regular punctures. There's also a different requirement for the tire width and pressures that we run, and I think a tubeless setup leads us to a more suitable tire width and tire pressure to begin with. With tubeless sealant often not working well below 65 psi, having a tire of an appropriate width to where we still protect the rim from rim damage results in a pretty comfortable and very quick and efficient tire setup. On top of that, one thing that I think many people don't talk about, aside from not needing to worry about pinch flats anymore and instead just worrying about rim damage, is the actual tire quality that we can choose when running a tubeless system. For us endurance riders, we often prefer more heavy-duty and durable tires to avoid getting flats in the first place. Many endurance cyclists wouldn't consider running a Tour de France style race tire for our events just because they're not durable and tough enough to prevent flats from happening repeatedly. A road racing cyclist doesn't have much choice. Whether they're running tubes or tubeless, they're going to be running a fast tire. But for us randonneurs, I see many of us running tubes with touring type tires. These can be incredibly slow. We could be losing 20, 30, maybe up to 40 watts, depending on the tire choice that we have. So by running tubeless, we not only get to choose, or are forced to choose, tire widths that are pretty comfortable and pressures that are suitably low, but we also get the chance to run truly fast tires and not worry so much about their durability. The tubeless sealant takes care of most of the punctures that we would get. And that, I think, is the #1 reason to consider a tubeless system. It's not for everybody. The cost, the effort, the maintenance, it is a real thing to consider. But out on the road, when you get to save 20, 30, up to 40 watts by running a race tire, I think it makes it well worth it. Take care, everyone. Bike safe, and see you in the next video.